Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 14th, 2026. We are just about 3 days away from the release of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, starring Matt Damon as Odysseus. Of course, there's also been a lot of controversy in the casting of Lupita Nyong'o, one of my favorite actresses, who is African, right? She's black, she's African, and she's playing the role of Helen of Troy. Now, there's been controversy in America in the casting of Nyong'o, a black woman, as Helen of Troy, who's assumed to be to have been a white woman. I don't know, since she actually was Helen of Troy was the daughter of the Olympian god, Greek Olympian god Zeus, right? By the way, this has nothing to do with my religious beliefs. I'm a Christian, but again, where I'm discussing the classics. So the Odyssey is a classic. The classics deal with Greek mythology and their beliefs and their literature. So in the classics, Greek mythology, Helen of Troy was the daughter of Zeus, right? The Olympian, the chief god of the Olympians, and he had impregnated her mother, disguised as a swan, and so she came and she hatched from an egg. That's Helen of Troy. So I don't know, if she's a daughter of a goddess of a god, I guess she could take any form, and of course I don't know, but if it's believed that Hollywood has taken artistic liberties and is misrepresenting Helen of Troy, uh, believed to have been white, as a black person. It wouldn't be the first time Hollywood's done that without controversy. Hollywood did this in the Clash of the Titans. Everybody knows the Clash of the Titans. I've watched the 1981 masterpiece that starred Harry Hamlin as Perseus, right? Perseus was one of the sons of, a son of Zeus. He wasn't an Olympian, right? He was a mortal, but a son of Zeus. Perseus is the hero. And the damsel in distress that he had to free and eventually married was Andromeda, right? Andromeda was the daughter of King Cepheus and Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia, they were king and queen of the Ethiopians, right? Ethiopian. So Andromeda was actually a princess, an Ethiopian princess, in the way it was written in the Greek mythology, um, and of course we know Ethiopians to have been black people. Ethiopia actually means, it's Greek. It means land of the burnt faces, right? People with burnt faces. That's what Ethiopia is. The term Africa didn't come to be used until much later, during the Roman Empire. It was the Romans who named the African province, because it was a province of Africa. It was a province of the Romans after they had, prevailed in the Punic Wars in the second century BC, and so it's historians think the etymology of Africa is actually from the Latin "aprica," which means sunny. Alternative, the Greek word Africa, which means without cold or without horrors. So importantly, and I'll get into that conversation as I carry on. Importantly, in Greek mythology, people that were black, people from Africa, they were looked on favorably by the Greeks, right? Because they thought they were favored by the gods. They thought that the gods viewed Africans, the black people, as blameless people and exceptionally pious. And so the Olympian gods, especially Poseidon, would go down to Africa, the land of, it wasn't called Africa then, of course, it was called Libya or Ethiopians, land of the black people, right? Land of the people with burnt faces. They would travel there and feast and socialize with the Africans, who would host, large banquets and hecatombs, what are called hecatombs. They'd slaughter like over 100 oxen, right, in honor of the Olympian gods, particularly Poseidon. I discussed this, that in fact, when Zeus finally decided in the upcoming movie, The Odyssey, right, when Zeus finally decides to order Calypso, who had held Odysseus captive for 7 years, when Zeus decided, gave the order that Calypso should release Odysseus and let him go back, return to his family, Poseidon, who was the one who was antagonizing Odysseus, right, and making him just circumnavigate and, have all those, perilous journeys, around the seas and whatnot. It was, Poseidon that had cursed him. Poseidon was actually socializing with the Ethiopians in the land of Ethiopian, where they were holding a banquet, a feast in his honor. So blacks feature prominently in Greek mythology. That's Africans. Again, back then they were known as Libyans or Ethiopians. Today, modern day Ethiopia, they chose that name Ethiopia, right? But back then, historically, in ancient times, the people from the country of Ethiopia today, were called Abyssinians, right? Abyssinia. You also see them in ancient texts, in scripture, in the Bible, and different places, and even in Islam. So Abyssinia was their land. By the way, in case nobody knew, coffee, which we all drink. I used to be a fan of Starbucks, until my recent travels. Coffee was first grown by in Abyssinia, right? By the people we currently call Ethiopians. So they were Abyssinians. Abyssinia was their land, and Ethiopia just was a general Greek term that the ancient Greeks used to describe people in sub-Saharan Africa, below Egypt, right? What we call sub-Saharan Africa. So what we call Africans today. Again, the etymology of Africa didn't come until the Roman Empire, and after the Punic Wars, when the Romans made, Africa part of their province, and they called it Africa. Africa in Latin means sunny. In Greek, Africa, they think that it also has an etymology, might have an etymology from Greek. The Greek means without horror, without horrors, right? Without horror, or without cold, without horrors. Again, and the Greeks highly revered, you can actually even say revered Africans. So, but I want to show the literature when Hollywood did, take artistic liberties and did misrepresent a black African woman as a white woman, and there was no controversy, and that's in the casting of Andromeda in Clash of the Titans. In Clash of the Titans in 1981, she was Andromeda was the princess. Andromeda was played by Judi Bowker, and in the 2010 version, Clash of the Titans, in which Sam Worthington was playing Perseus and Liam Neeson was Zeus, the white American actress Alexa Davalos played Andromeda. So white women playing a black woman. And I could show you evidence that Andromeda was actually Ethiopian from the writing of Ovid, right? Ovid was the Roman poet who wrote Heroides and Metamorphosis. So Metamorphosis is sort of the foundational text, one of the poems that's Perseus and Andromeda. So it's a foundational text in which the Hollywood rendition Clash of the Titans came about, right? That we know. And of course it's from Greek mythology. But Ovid, again, he was a contemporary of the first Roman emperor Augustus, right? Ovid was a Roman poet, and he wrote Metamorphosis, and he also wrote Heroides, right? Heroides is a poem in which Ovid actually describes Andromeda, right? And I have an excerpt here. So in Heroides 15, in a letter from Sappho, right? Sappho was a Greek poet from the island of Lesbos who was in love with Phaon. Phaon was a ferryman who had been blessed by the goddess Aphrodite, right? Aphrodite was a goddess of beauty, the daughter of Zeus, and Phaon was blessed by Aphrodite with immortality, youth, and immortal youth and beauty. And Sappho was a Greek poet of the island of Lesbos, was in love with him, and so she's writing him. She's writing him, and she cites Andromeda's dark skin, right? So this is Heroides. It's a verse epistle of Heroides 15, and I'm just going to quickly quote an excerpt. So this is the writing. Again, Sappho is writing Phaon, and she's talking about her own lack of pale skin. But let me read it. It's a direct quote. If I'm not dazzling fair, Cepheus's Andromeda was fair in Perseus's eyes, though dusky with the hue of her native land. Besides, white pigeons oft are mated with those of different hue, and black turtle dove too is loved by the bird of green, right? So you see it right there again. Let me quote it again. If I am not dazzling fair, Cepheus's Andromeda was fair in Perseus's eyes, though dusky with the hue of her native land, right? So that's describing Andromeda, that she was dark skinned. In the original Latin text, actually, her complexion is described as fusca, right? Fusca means swarthy, means dark complexioned, black complexioned, brown, swarthy. So Andromeda was a black person, right, of African descent, and she's expressly described as Ethiopian, right? Ethiopian. Cepheus was her father. Cepheus was king of Ethiopia, was her father, and so and her mother was Cassiopeia, right, queen of the Ethiopians, right? And Ethiopians again were black people, right? That's what it meant. So you see that in Greek civilization, the Greek classics, blacks, Africans, people of African descent were actually revered. They were highly praised. You couldn't see racism that we know today. So racism is a medieval construction from that coincided with the rise of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in the Americas, and that's when racism as we know it today came about. But in Greek mythology, in ancient Greeks culture, you see them praising Africans. Again, Poseidon, the Olympian gods, they would take trips to Ethiopia, right? They would take trips. That's Africa. What Africa was called. It was thought of being the end of the world, right? The edge in terms of geography, that it was the end of the world, right? And so they would, particularly Poseidon, like I said earlier, they'd go, and the Ethiopians, the black people, Africans would hold large-scale banquets and feasts honoring the Olympian gods, including Poseidon. And as I just read, Andromeda, whom Perseus marries, Perseus was the hero in the Clash of the Titans, and Andromeda had been cursed by Poseidon because her mother, who was queen of the Ethiopians, Cassiopeia, had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, right? The nymphs or the sea goddesses, including Thetis. Thetis was again the goddess mother of Achilles, right? Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, the hero of Iliad, and because of that, Andromeda was cursed, and her spirit would wander off to a sea monster, and eventually she was to be sacrificed to a sea monster, right? In the movie Clash of the Titans, the sea monster is called Kraken, right? But Kraken is actually not the term that was used by the Greeks, right? It was Cetus or Cadus or whatever, That was their sea monster. The kraken is actually a Scandinavian sea god. But so you should watch the movie. Let me not describe the movie. Both movies are fun. Where the the effects used in Clash of the Titans in 1981 was, I think it was first of its kind. It was a magnificently done movie. You see Medusa, you see, then there's Calibus, and all sorts of things going on, special effects. 1981, but importantly, Andromeda was played by a white woman, even though the Greeks described Andromeda as a black woman. She was an Ethiopian. She was a black woman. And I just read it from Ovid's Heroides 15, right? In Heroides, Andromeda is described as a black person, as having black skin, not a white person. And this was no controversy in Hollywood. It was no controversy. It was not controversial in America. There was no dispute. There was no rancor over it, like the controversy that's been generated because Lupita Nyong'o, an African woman, a black woman, is playing Helen of Troy. But in any event, I look forward to seeing the Odyssey. I like Matt Damon a lot, and I've read the Odyssey. Very interesting. Homer is often described as the greatest storyteller who ever lived. It was when you start reading the Odyssey, it's a page turner. It's so interesting, and to think it was written millennia, like so long ago, but it's still so interesting when you read it today. Of course, I read the translation, not in its Greek form. In any event, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.